So, welcome to Quarantine Historians, maybe or maybe not drinking coffee. Are you drinking coffee?
I have multiple drinks.
Okay.
So I did make a coffee.
Okay.
I'm a little nervous. I'm a one coffee a day person usually, but I couldn't be on this show without at least a little coffee. And I love coffee. So I may start vibrating out of my chair. And then I also got a mug of water too. So my Preservation Society mug. So a little bit of both.
I like it. Yeah, I have coffee because it's still early enough in the morning. And I do have an insane amount of mugs and often try to think about who I'm interviewing and what mug I'm going to use that fits the person.
Love
this one, I'm like, I need one of those preservation mugs. But I was looking around and I was like, what do I have? And I was like, I was like, preservation makes me think of like buildings and structures and like saving stuff. And I was like, I have this Big Bad Wolf mug. And I was like, people build roller coasters.
I love it. We'll take it.
This is historic because this roller coaster doesn't exist anymore.
They should have preserved it.
They should have preserved it. They got rid of it and put, I can't remember the name of it. It's Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and it is an amazing roller coaster there now. I mean, I miss Big Bad Wolf. That was my first roller coaster that I really ever rode. So it has a special place, and they should have preserved it. I would have taken a piece of the track. It'd be like in my front yard.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, well, thank you so much for joining me. What I have been doing over last season and this season, our board president, Steve's been interviewing and talking with different academic historians about different historic topics. And I have been talking to museum professionals, was how it started, to kind of take people behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. But then it really morphed into all of the other fields that history touches and how they interweave. Yeah. And so I've talked to artists and I've talked to lawyers. And so I thought and I've talked to archivists, and I thought it might be interesting to talk to you and get into a little bit about the preservation world for the public. And understand where maybe some of that overlap can happen with museums or historic sites, really, and preservation. So before we get into that, I want then to meet you. So if you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of background on who you are.
Sure. I'm Jessie Landl. I'm the executive director of the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County. I'm still somewhat new to the Asheville area. We've been here for about 5 years now, and I've been with the Preservation Society pretty much all of that time, and we just absolutely love it here. My husband and I moved here from South Florida, and we really, really like it. So we're super happy to be here. And so my background when I came here was more in fundraising. So I actually started with the organization as the director of development, doing fundraising for the organization. But when they hired me, it was the first time they had ever had 2 employees for the Preservation Society since they began in 1976. So it's a pretty big deal. And because we were such a small staff, right away, it's kind of my favorite thing about working at a small nonprofit is you don't get stuck just doing your job. You get to do a little bit of everything, which is how I prefer it. So right away, I got to start doing mission-based work. And I didn't have a background in preservation. I had a passion for preservation, but it wasn't necessarily my background. And so it was really exciting for me because I got to do all the fundraising, but I immediately got to start doing mission-based work as well. And even really quickly developing new programs for the organization, which they completely embraced. So it was exciting to work someplace that I could sort of dive in and pick the things that I was really passionate about and could see room for us to expand and grow.
I thought that was interesting. Part of the reason I reached out to you is because so often, in the history world now, and especially in the museum world, it like to get the job I'm in, you have to do an undergrad in history, and most of the time you have to have a master's in public history and museum studies.
Yeah.
And so, and I think when people think about history work or preservation work or any of that kind of thing, it sounds like, people get bogged down in like the degrees. And so I'm like, there are ways to get involved without having necessarily those traditional degrees that we think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, what did you actually go to school for?
I went to school for environmental studies. And before this, I worked for an environmental nonprofit. Again, on the fundraising side, I got out of college and I was really lost because I was passionate about the environment, but I was never meant to be outdoors or muddy. That it just, so when I picked my degree, it was like, I wasn't thinking it all the way through, right? I was, you're 18 years old, you're out of high school. I have a passion for the environment. I didn't think about what that was going to mean as a career. And so I kind of bounced around, just really lost for a while. And then a fundraising job came up at an environmental nonprofit. And it was like everything clicked for me because it was so clear that I had all this passion, but I just couldn't find a way to direct it. And so ever since then, I've loved working in the nonprofit world. And
right.
Like I said, I've always had this passion for architecture and preservation, certainly. And for me, the crossover between an environmental position and preservation was really, it was there completely. It wasn't a leap to move from an environmental organization to a preservation organization. I think it's one of the things we are most challenged by in preservation is getting the message out there that it's an environmental issue as well. And it's really hard to talk about in ways that kind of get through to people. The greenest building is the building that's already been built. People think about new buildings with solar panels and all of that, but the conversation around embodied energy, the energy that's already been put into an existing building, it's just a hard message to get across to people. But so for me, there was this real crossover. So getting into the preservation world wasn't a leap for me at all. But yeah, so that was kind of my way of getting to do the work I was passionate about has been in the nonprofit world because I found that I was successful as a fundraiser.
Nice.
And it's sort of like here.
That's really interesting. Environmental. That's kind of, there's some overlap there with like museums and historic sites. A lot of, our historic sites require a lot of work outside, and like I deal with a lot more, like the issues that we deal with at the Vance birthplace, as far as preservation related, pest control, things like that are a much bigger issue than say when you're working in a museum setting and you're in this like building, there's pest control when it comes to like the collection. But when you were like, I don't need to be outside, I was like, I feel you. I'm definitely, I've worked in historic sites and museums, but I'm more of a museum person, partly just because I really don't like wet grass. What would be like kind of the main things you would want people to know about the Preservation Society, like what it is that you all do on a daily basis?
Yeah. Okay. Well, lately, all I do, it feels like, is we're currently fighting a demolition threat of 12 to 13 historic homes. They're all contributing structures in the National Register District. So they're federally listed historic homes that a development group wants to demolish in a neighborhood to do a large scale development. So that's this fight that's happening on Charlotte Street. I feel like a lot of people in town have heard about it, and it's keeping me very busy. it's such an important part of what we do, but it's also a really small part of what we do, I would say. It's just getting a lot of focus right now. So it's not my favorite part of it. I don't love this being in this battle, but I'm really passionate about it. It's really important to us that Asheville grows in a healthy way. And this is such a great opportunity of a space that could be developed. There's a lot of empty space on the land. And so we think infill is a healthier way to see growth in communities. It preserves the character of the existing neighborhoods while still allowing for growth. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of great studies out there, again, about how green existing buildings are. So you've got all the embodied energy of the materials and the work that went into building an existing structure. And then all of the work and waste that goes into demolishing an existing structure. And to offset all of that, even the greenest building has to be around for so many years that it just doesn't make sense in terms of the environment. So the best thing to do is to upfit old buildings, find ways to adaptively reuse them. There's all kinds of products in the market to make historic windows more environmentally, seal them up better and all of that. So there's great opportunities for that sort of thing. So a project like this is bad, for the historic character and the charm of a community. It's bad for the environment. There's a lot of issues. So that's why we're kind of so focused on this one. But we do a lot of other stuff. One of my favorite things that we do is our grant program. And actually, when I had been here for a little while, I got the opportunity to get this off the ground for us. So it's actually a program I've been with since the very beginning. And what we do is we give small grants, $500 to $5,000, to projects in the county. So we work in all of Buncombe County that are tied to preservation in some way. So the main focuses are your traditional bricks and mortar. Somebody has a roof leak or whatever the case may be. And the funny thing is, when we developed this program, I thought that was going to be our biggest category. And it really hasn't. We've done some great bricks and mortar projects, but it's sort of what I thought was going to be the biggest need, and it hasn't been. And then we fund education and research. And the third category is survey and designation. So getting on the National Register or getting a local historic designation and that sort of thing. And those two categories we've had a lot of projects in. So since the late 2017, we've funded over $65,000 in projects.
Wow.
And I know it's been really exciting. And the focus has been on reaching our underserved and rural communities, areas that our traditional preservation work over the years hasn't had enough, we just haven't had enough success getting to those communities. So exciting about it from the beginning was this opportunity for the community to tell us what preservation projects needed to be done. So instead of us identifying what needed to be done in some of our underserved communities, we're saying to the community, you tell us what preservation work is needed for your neighborhood. And so we've done things like Calvary Presbyterian, a church in the East End neighborhood, a historically African-American neighborhood in Asheville, was having an emergency plumbing issue. They had to repair their plumbing. Winter was coming. We were able to give them $5,000 towards those repairs. So that's kind of more on the bricks and mortar side. Then we've gotten to do things like we funded a lot of National Register nominations. It's a really expensive process to go through, or it can be, relatively expensive. But there's so many benefits that come from it for places. And I think that in some ways, I wonder if that's going to be the legacy of our grant program, is how many new National Register locations there are. We're still a relatively new program, but I've just been really excited about that. So early on, we did a grant for the South Asheville Cemetery. which is a cemetery for, enslaved folks, and it continued after the Civil War was over as well. It was originally on the property that was owned by the Smith McDowell, the families that lived at the Smith McDowell house. And it's tucked away in Kenilworth, and not that many people know about it. It's got 92 gravestones, I want to say, but they believe that over 2,000 people are buried there.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic spot. There's an association that's worked really hard to take care of it and to continue to identify people that are potentially buried there. And there's a lot of great work being done there. And so that was a really exciting one for us as well. So we've gotten to do projects like that all over the community with the grant program, and it's just been so exciting. And the support from the community for it has been incredible. So the first few years, we raised the money for the grant program just at our gala. Not a silent auction, not a lot, just hey, we need you to support this project we're doing. Raise your hand to fund the grant program. And we fully funded it for the first several years. It's a little challenging now because we're facing our second year with no grant or no gala. And so right now we're fundraising, trying to raise the funds to continue the grant program and make sure it doesn't have to falter at all. So, but our board's been great about continuing to support the program. So that's one of the things that I love that we get to do.
Now, so I have a couple follow-up questions.
Please. Good.
One, if someone is unfamiliar with like National Historic Landmark, like what are the benefits of being registered as a National Historic Landmark?
Yeah. Okay. So designation is such a confusing, I'm telling you, people that live in designated homes don't understand it. It's really complicated. So this is kind of the simplified version. So you've got the National Register of Historic Places, and that's kind of the one that everybody knows about. Mm-hmm. That one is, I like to say it's all carrot and no stick. So there's benefits to it, like you can take advantage of tax benefits for rehabilitating properties. So you can get tax credits for rehabilitation work done on places that are on the National Register. Okay, so it can be really beneficial to somebody, especially if you're buying an old house that needs a lot of work. There's a lot of benefit there for you. And you work with the State Historic Preservation Office, and they work you through the process. And it does come with, they expect you to rehabilitate the house to a certain standard because you're taking advantage of these tax credits. But it can be a really beneficial thing for folks that live in historic homes. And in fact, it can be so beneficial that oftentimes it's worth going through if your place is not on the National Register, but potentially could be, it's worth examining whether or not that might even pay off spending the money to get it on the National Register in order to be able to take advantage of those credits. So that's kind of that side of things. What people don't realize is that provides no protections. So if you live in a National Register of Historic Places listed property in a district that your house is contributing to that district, it can be bulldozed tomorrow. And that's been sort of the shock for the people living in the Chestnut Hill National Register district that are facing this demolition threat from the developers, because a lot of people have said to us, but it's National Register, but that does not place protections on a place. So it's kind of been shocking to a lot of people. The next level of designation that we have here is local historic designation. And so we have local districts and local landmarks. And that's overseen by HRC, the Historic Resources Commission, which is a part of the city of Asheville. And actually, I'm sorry, I should say it's a city and county commission. And so, places like the Flatiron Building downtown, that's a local landmark. Or the Gatehouse on Charlotte Street, that's a local landmark. And then there's local districts. And those, we actually have 4 local districts: a small neighborhood called St. Dunstan's, Albemarle Park, Biltmore Village. So when you're in Biltmore Village and you see that the McDonald's looks like all the other buildings, they had to do that because it's a local district. So if you're building new, it has to conform to the style of the area. And if you're going to make changes to an existing structure, it has to be approved by the Historic Resources Commission. And then the most well-known, I'd say that it's a local district, is Montford. So those are our 4 districts in Buncombe County.
A lot of people assume that like all of our historic sites, are national landmarks, things like that. And they're not. A lot of them aren't.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Well, and then, it's so interesting because again, with a local district, people think, okay, it's got protections. I have to go to HRC if I want to, put a new roof on, right? So it must have protections. The only protections that has, yes, you can't make alterations without permission, but if you put in for a demolition permit, there's a 365-day waiting period, and then you can demolish a place in a local district. So again, we run into this, there are not these permanent protections. And so one of the things, you asked me what we do on the day-to-day, and one of the big things we do is we run an easement program.
Okay.
This is another one of these like technical things. It's so hard to talk to people about because it's kind of complicated and not that exciting sounding. But preservation easements in the state of North Carolina is the only way to put permanent protections on a historic structure. Okay. And so what we do as a nonprofit organization is that we can accept the donation of an easement on a property. And all that means is then we are responsible for monitoring in perpetuity that a place is protected to the standards in the easement. So sometimes the easement will just be a facade easement that someone places on a property, which means that any alterations to the facade, you have to ask our permission for. They have to be done to a certain standard. And beyond that, we're also ensuring that you're upkeeping the property. So if we're seeing severe rot problems or something like that. And so a lot of people, if they have a place that's really important to them, that's been in their family for a very long time, or, for whatever reason, they'll place an easement on it to make sure that after they're gone, it's still protected.
Why do people get local designations if it doesn't protect? Like, what's the benefit?
Yeah, so local designations have some, you look at a neighborhood like Montford, and it was in the 80s in really poor condition. And they saw a couple demolitions, I think, early on. And people said, okay, no, these houses are really special. We have to figure out a way to prioritize, the historic structures in this neighborhood. And so by forming the local district, it does, there are protections to that, in that somebody can't put on a whole huge addition that does not suit the neighborhood. And so you start to see the neighborhood get protected in that way, that the alterations to the houses don't happen. And a 365-day waiting period on a demolition permit is a pretty good deterrent. It's not perfect, right? But that's a pretty big deal. And it gives the community a lot of time to speak out and try and find a solution so that the property isn't lost.
Right.
That's a district. A local landmark has an extra benefit, which is that if you're a local landmark, you pay 50% of your property taxes.
Okay.
So it's a good incentive to go after that local landmark status. You're then, again, now you've made it so that your property is under the purview of the HRC. But you've got this great financial benefit to it that presumably those funds can go towards the upkeep of that property.
Why are some communities more underserved than others?
Yeah. Well, I think that an interesting thing we, at the planning and zoning meeting recently for the Charlotte Street project that I was talking about with the big demolition threat, their lawyer was arguing that these houses weren't historic, even though they're contributing structures in the National Register. The reason was they weren't special enough. They just belonged to average people. A governor didn't live there, right? So they're not historic. We obviously disagree with that, but I think that that is something that historic preservation faces, which is, we see a place like the Grove Arcade or the S&W cafeteria, or all these buildings that we have in this town that are beautiful and sort of opulent, and that's what a lot of people think about for historic preservation. But one of the things that I think is getting talked about a lot more in preservation, which I'm really excited about, is not just architectural significance of a place, but also cultural significance of a place. And so I think that is something that's becoming more and more important in conversations about preservation. And a couple of projects we're doing right now that I think speak to this is, one, the Walton Street Pool and Park is something we've been talking about recently. It's a segregation era pool that's city owned, and it's important culturally to the South Side neighborhood. And there's a lot of history associated with that pool. And currently the pool's closed and another pool's being built nearby. And we're really concerned about the preservation of this pool going forward because it means something to the community. Architecturally speaking, this is not a pool that you would consider for preservation, right? But culturally speaking, it's so important. Right. And we have to be having those conversations. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done is, in this case, we didn't even go through our grant program. The board, our board approved, and we hired a consultant who was writing a local landmark designation and also a National Register designation to go down both of those paths at the same time to try, to show the importance of this place to the community and to the city in hopes that this will be preserved. Another great example of that is a project we're doing out in Sandy Mush. And partially for us, a lot of us live in Asheville, and so we don't know about the places out in the county. There's so many special places out in the county, but I need everybody that's listening that lives out in the county to call me when a place in your community is in trouble, because sometimes I just don't know. Yeah. I just don't, we don't have a big enough staff. We're not out there enough. And so Asheville has the loudest voice, and it doesn't, we don't want it to be that way. So this one is like a personal, I'm excited about all these projects, you can tell, but I'm really excited about this one. So there is a cabin out in Sandy Mush called the Boyd Cabin, or sometimes it's called the Boyd Cabin. And it's, I believe, 1874 Freedman's Cabin. And it's the only Freedman's Cabin I'm aware of in Buncombe County. And I keep hoping someone's going to go, no, I know of another. So please, I'm open to being told that there's more. But it is on private property, and it is in really bad condition. And it's falling down, it's collapsing. And it's gotten to the point that it's too far gone to prop it up at this point, right? So we have, we're moving forward. What we did is, over the last couple of months, we did a really in-depth documentation of the cabin in its place currently. And so for that, we partnered with the State Historic Preservation Office and also with the Appalachian Barn Alliance. And the three organizations got out there, spent several days on site measuring every inch of the cabin so that measured drawings can be made, photographed it really well, documented where it is on the site and all of that. And now we're looking at a schedule of mid-June for disassembling the cabin. Okay. We're going to take it apart. We're going to treat it properly so that bugs can't get into it, hopefully. And we're going to store it in a barn for the time being, with the hopes that we can, moving forward, figure out a way to raise the funds to either restore it in place, which of course is always like the thing you want to do, but is also somewhat potentially impractical to raise the kind of funds we would need for an on-site restoration and, rebuild and restoration. on private property, right? It makes it so challenging. So we have some possible options for property where it could be at a heritage site, that it could be visited and all of that. So we're looking at all of those options going forward, and this is going to be most likely a very long process. But the priority now is to get it disassembled and, safely stored so that we don't have continued deterioration. So that's one that I'm really excited about too. And again, architecturally speaking, in this case, it's actually pretty incredible. It's got a 2-story loft with a fireplace on both levels, which I think is pretty unusual. It's really kind of special. But again, it's not necessarily one of our, downtown buildings that everybody knows about, right?
I find that really interesting when you're talking about, the fact that, a governor didn't live in the houses or something, and looking at it culturally, that is some overlap, with what we do in the museum world and in trying to help people learn and connect about more than just, the people who were written about. Because the problem is, I'm like, if you're only interpreting the people who were written about, then all you're ever going to probably learn about are white men.
Yeah.
So,
well, you look at the South Asheville Cemetery. It's hard because you don't know who those people were that were buried there. It's, you know what I mean? We don't have those. And so, you're exactly right. And that's, the houses on Charlotte Street, they don't have these big histories. They don't necessarily have these big stories behind them, but the claim that makes them not historic is crazy.
It's false.
Embarrassing, and they were workforce housing, and they're workforce housing today. And, so it's really hard, when you hear a description like that about a historic place.
Well, and, it's honestly, I would say, almost more historic in a way, because it's more representative of how everyone was living, people can relate to it more. I mean, yes, it's cool to go to Tryon Palace. Yes, it's cool to go to, Monticello and Mount Vernon and all those places. That's lovely. And I go there and I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But what I find on a daily basis with visitors, when they come to, say, the Vance birthplace, they're not really that interested in, normally they're not that interested in Zebulon Vance. Right. They want to know more what was happening on that land, who all was living there, what was life like. And that requires, us talking about everyone who is on the property. And I think it can feel small to people. They think oh, this wasn't significant. And it's once you start adding in all of these, common average people, then it is significant because it makes up an entire community.
Right, exactly. But I do think it's changing, and it's certainly a focus of ours here, is how we can, again, let the communities know that we're here to serve them, and you tell us what's culturally important to you. I don't know if I don't live in the neighborhood. And so that's the insight I need from the community. Is, what's important to you and meaningful to you. And and I think the other thing that's important right now is that our underserved communities are sort of feeling the most pressure too. So a lot of times these communities it's where the real estate's the most affordable. And so we're seeing neighborhoods, like Shiloh just get decimated. Right? It's just developers coming in and buying up the land and filling it with houses. And, we're not against development. We're not against density, but we do have to protect these culturally important places. And so we have to find a way, you know, that it's been one of our major focuses over the last year is how do we keep people in these neighborhoods in their homes? I mean, what we're seeing happening that's so frustrating is, so these developers are coming into a neighborhood like Shiloh, they'll buy a plot of land that had one house on it, and they'll knock it down and build 4 houses. And now the taxes for the person who lives next door in the you know, the 1920s house, now their taxes go up $50,000, you know, their tax value goes up $50,000 overnight. Now they're behind on their taxes, and they're going to sell to a developer then soon, right? So how do we keep people, how do we not only preserve the houses, but how do we also keep people in their homes and in their communities? The East End neighborhood, you drive through the East End and the views of downtown Asheville, you know, it's like this it's incredible, right? Well, that people, these houses are getting sold. We recently got word about a demolition threat, a 1910 house in the East End neighborhood. Developers buying it and going to put in multiple units, right? Demolish it in multiple units. And I reached out to the developer and I said, this is a neighborhood that's been decimated by urban renewal. There is not much left. And we can't see the loss of a 1910 house. Let me buy it from you. The Preservation Society will buy it from you for what you paid for it. Let us help you like undo this. And the answer was no.
Wow.
So it makes it really hard for, you know, we're just trying to figure out the path to how we can support these neighborhoods and keep people in their homes and in their communities.
Right. So what has been, like, what is your favorite part of working for the Preservation Society?
I think I was talking about it earlier. I love working for a small organization and getting to do a little bit of everything. And so, yeah, that is what this job is for me. And so I'm a fundraiser, yes. I manage a staff, yes. But I also get to do all this like amazing mission-based work. I get to go into all the really cool houses, and
Yeah,
I guess that's probably my favorite. It didn't come to mind right away because it just isn't happening as much during COVID. But I get to go into like all the coolest houses in town. And pre-COVID, my favorite thing was I would just randomly sometimes cold call somebody and say like, we love your house so much. Can we throw a party there? And they'd say yes. So like I've gotten this, like I'll get to like, I just would pick my favorite house in town and then see if I can throw a party there for the Preservation Society. So yeah, getting to go inside all of these incredible places. Asheville has all this stuff that people don't even realize. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably my favorite part, is that I get to go inside people's homes all the time, and it's my job.
Well, that's the same
weird.
That's the same as museum people too. Historic sites museum people. People are like, "What's your part?" I'm like, "I get to touch the artifacts, and you don't."
Yeah, exactly right.
I mean, I'm careful, and I wear gloves, and I do what I'm supposed to do, but like. Where everything that says don't touch, I put it there. So, yeah. Remember, when you talk about fundraising, still to this day, people will talk to me about your calendar. So for
you were one of our centerfolds.
I was January.
Were you January? Okay.
I think I was January 2020.
Okay.
So I think it was 2020. Yeah. So
that sounds right.
I kept it just forever so that someday when I have kids, I can be like, I was featured in a calendar, preservation calendar, and they're going to be like, nerd. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. I think the Faces of Preservation, we call it, it got started before me, before I was around, but I do think it's an important message, which is the people associated with these places. And so we take pictures of people in historic places all over town and use them in our calendar every year. And yes, you were one of our faces. So, but that's kind of the tie-in, is that these places are important in large part because of the people that are tied to them. And now tied to them and have been tied to them in the past. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. When the best part was like, I knew that it was coming. You all had taken my picture, but I hadn't seen it yet. And I will tell you, I had a Mountain History and Culture Group board meeting. This is like our January, so pre-pandemic. And we go to start the board meeting, and the lawyer on our board, Walter Curry, shows up, and he's like, before we all get started, he was like, I have something I want to present. And I was like, we're all like, what? And all of a sudden he like pulls out the faces of the calendar. And as soon as I saw the calendar, I was like, oh no.
This has actually happened. They did it.
He like pulled it out, and he was like, got this in the mail today, and like opened it up, and he was like, our Kimberly's January.
That is so funny.
And I was like, oh my God. I was like, that picture, I look like I'm smiling so large because I'm so uncomfortable. Like, I'm like,
I really love this. I'm so happy right now.
This looks so good. They're all like smiling and serious, and mine, I'm like, ah.
Yeah, anyways, we always have to order like 100 extra calendars just for the people that are in the calendar. And I can't tell you how many calendars I've had to mail to people's mothers. It's really cute. Like, I won't call anyone out by name, but people in the calendar will call me and they'll be like, my mother lives in Michigan and she's wondering if you can send her 5 calendars. I'm like, of course I can. It's so cute. So yeah. So, and then the funny thing, talk about fundraising. Like, now I have all these mothers that have joined the organization because then they're so sweet. They're like, oh, I should be a member. And so, so I have mothers all over the country of people that have been in our calendar who are now members of the Preservation Society. So it's really working out.
Oh my gosh. That's immediately, when you were talking about fundraising, I was like, that calendar. Anything like big misconceptions or like things that you would want people to know about the Preservation Society that maybe they don't know?
Yeah, I think that, well, I kind of think I've put a lot of those to rest in our talk today, I hope, which is that preservation is in some way elitist. And, for me, I think that's definitely what they're trying to argue in terms of the Charlotte Street Project. We're just NIMBYists, we're just against all development and all of that. And it's just not the case. And we think preservation is important in all parts of our community, and we're working to make sure we're accomplishing that. And so I think that is, there is that certain misconception, and we do our gala every year and it's in these big fancy mansions and it's this fancy party. But we work on, cabins and cemeteries and all over the community. And so I think that's the misconception that we have to sort of deal with the most, but that I think people are also, hearing from us that we're doing the work in the community. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face, though, is that preservation is sort of an elitist thing. So, and again, it's tied to people, when they think of preservation, they think of the Biltmore estate, which is like this incredible example of preservation. And they should think of the Biltmore estate, but they should also think of Boyd Cabin and the Walton Pool. And they should think of Charlotte Street and the places that, are architecturally and culturally important to all of us.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
But, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye.